Waldameer is a small but unique amusement park right on the shore of Lake Erie in Pennsylvania. Those that already know of the park likely learned about it for one of two reasons: the classic and incredibly maintained Bill Tracy dark rides, and Ravine Flyer II, the park's headline wooden coaster. Featuring a bridge that crosses over Peninsula Drive, Ravine Flyer II is definitely a bucket list wooden coaster, but most everyone who hears of this coaster asks one question: where is Ravine Flyer I? Make no mistake, that name is not an error, and a walk around the park will lead to Ravine Flyer III, the park's kiddie coaster, but one is nowhere to be seen. To find the answer, we have to travel back an entire century. Ravine Flyer, or Ravine Flyer I as it's now known, first opened in 1922, designed by the legendary John A. Miller. Being that my home park is Kennywood and John Miller had a hand in designing all three wooden coasters there, I was immediately interested in finding out more about Ravine Flyer. One look at these wooden coasters can tell you that Miller loved using the natural terrain to his advantage when designing coasters, and that was no exception in the case of Ravine Flyer. The coaster featured two drops into a ravine, hence the coaster's name. There's a bit of misconception in the coaster community that the drops over Peninsula Drive were always a planned feature of Ravine Flyer. In actuality, the road did not exist when the coaster was built. It was constructed 2 years later in 1924. Waldameer donated the land to the state so the road could be built, and it was because of this donation that the park was allowed to construct Ravine Flyer II 70 years later. Very few photos were ever taken of the coaster, and much of its layout would be shrouded in mystery until 2020, when YouTube user Team Ravine posted a reconstruction of the coaster made in no limits with the aid of historical photos provided by the park. Sadly, Ravine Flyer did not operate beyond the 1930s due to an accident in 1938. There are various accounts of what happened on Ravine Flyer's final operating day. Some say that the track at the bottom of the second hill splintered. Others say that one of the train's wheels locked up, causing the entire train to lose momentum. Regardless of the cause, this resulted in the train valleying at the bottom of the first ravine drop. It was at that point that a young man named Clarence Search stood up, either in a panicked attempt to leave the train or possibly to check if another train was approaching. This resulted in him losing his balance, and he fell 18 feet to the road below, causing a fatal skull fracture. A subsequent investigation into the coaster's safety would find the splintered track, and Ravine Flyer would be condemned by the state and demolished soon after. In the decades that followed, the park would frequently show interest in reviving Ravine Flyer for a modern audience, but would find difficulty in finding a manufacturer. Proposals were shown from the DIN Corporation as well as Custom Coasters International, but CCI going defunct in 2002 would cancel those plans. The park would finally find its manufacturer in 2007 with the then new Gravity Group, and construction would begin. The park faced a great deal of opposition to the coaster's construction from the local government, citing noise concerns and the legality of having a coaster track travel over a major roadway, but the park was able to produce documentation from 1924 when they gifted the land under Ravine Flyer I so the road could be constructed. This allowed them to finally proceed with the coaster's construction. Noise complaints were addressed with the presence of 3 tunnels on the coaster's layout. The original animated POV showed a 4th tunnel right after the first pass over Peninsula Drive, but this tunnel was removed from the final product. 70 years after Ravine Flyer I closed, Ravine Flyer II opened at Waldameer on May 17, 2008. After such a long gap between the coasters, one would hope that the wait was worth it, and it absolutely was. Ravine Flyer II won Best New Ride at the 2008 Golden Ticket Awards and has placed in the top 10 wooden coasters every year since its opening. So, what's the experience like? I got to ride during my first trip to Waldameer in May 2021, and aside from the dark rides, Ravine Flyer II was my main reason for visiting the park. The entrance is fittingly located in nearly the exact same location as Ravine Flyer I. The old station still remains today as a picnic pavilion next door. One thing I was surprised to see is that Ravine Flyer II uses PTC trains and not the newer Timberliner trains Gravity Group have been using on their more recent coasters. After further research though, I now realize that this coaster actually predates the creation of the Timberliners, so if Waldameer ever wanted to do a small upgrade one year, they could get some Timberliners to put on here. That's not to say that PTC trains are bad, but speaking from experience, Timberliners are far more comfortable. The PTC trains have a seatbelt and a lap bar, and it's kind of a snug fit even for a skinny guy like me, but I wouldn't classify it as uncomfortable. After leaving the station, the trains ascend the 80-foot lift hill. Thanks to the way this coaster uses the terrain, it's a case where the drop is longer than the lift. Speaking of which, the chain lift actually slows down at the top to give you a better look at the view, and what a view it is. You can see straight out over Lake Erie, and it's a phenomenal sight, but you can't appreciate it for too long as the train heads straight into the 118-foot drop. This drop throws you out of your seat if you're towards the back of the train, and this is when I began to realize that Ravine Flyer II is way more intense than I was expecting. I wouldn't say it's painfully rough, but it's one of the more aggressive wooden coasters I've ridden. You get some good floater airtime on the first hill over Peninsula Drive, and the train immediately heads into a bank turn back towards the road. On this hill, the train slows down a considerable amount and loses a lot of its momentum, perhaps to once again allow for a view of Lake Erie. Despite the fact that the train does build its speed back up after this section, I feel that this hill does impact the pacing of the layout. Fortunately, after crossing over the road once again, the train reaches my personal favorite part: 2 back-to-back tunnels with ejector airtime between each. With how small each tunnel is, these are good head chopper elements, and the speed at which you go through them means you're going in and out of the daylight with only a few seconds in between. The remainder of the layout consists of a mix of small airtime hills and sharp bank turns, some of which are actually 90 degrees to the ground. The airtime here isn't as strong as the earlier tunnel sections, but it's still enjoyable, and the train keeps its momentum going through those last few hills until hitting the brakes. Ravine Flyer II isn't the longest coaster in the world. It's actually relatively short when you look at the layout as a whole, but I would describe it as relentless. From the moment the train leaves the chain lift until it hits the brakes, there's really only one moment the coaster allows you to catch your breath: the top of the hill after the turnaround. Every other moment of the layout is either going to be throwing you out of your seat or whipping you left and right through those turns. It may be short, but Ravine Flyer II pulls no punches and packs everything it can into a roughly minute-and-a-half ride. By the time I got my final ride during my visit, it was actually starting to rain, and flying through those tunnels with the stinging rain pouring down the whole time was something I will always remember. To this day, Ravine Flyer II continues to rank in the top 10 wooden coasters worldwide, and for good reason. It's a near-perfect modernization of a layout that was nearly lost to time. A layout gone for 7 decades, but one that remained in the minds of those who run the park. I can't recommend this coaster enough, and it just might be the best wooden coaster in Pennsylvania, but I'm still missing a few parks, so we'll see about that. It's worth visiting Waldameer just for this, but I'll always recommend the dark rides as well. I can never get enough of the Wacky Shack. So then, that's going to do it from me for this video on Ravine Flyer 1 and 2. If you've ridden it, feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you all for joining me here on Rampaging Rex Productions, and stay tuned for more coaster content coming here soon.